we'll start off kind of a general question, and I'll kind of throw it off to everyone, and whoever wants to answer this is certainly welcome to do so. So we talk a lot about, obviously, cost containment, some of the products and services that we bring to the table relative to how people can control those healthcare costs long term. So I guess my question is there any one or two things as the people that are on the risk that you see as the most effective today, and maybe anything that you might be excited about moving forward? Anyone want to tackle that? Look at him. Yeah, there you go.
Is this working? There we go.
Yeah.
We've seen probably 3 or 4 things that, at least in my mind, stand out. The one that we've talked extensively about today, reference-based pricing, is kind of a no-brainer, so I don't think we need to go too heavy on that. Another newer one for us has been the concept of a fiduciary PBM, which seems to be working really well. Captives are an obvious one. We're an MGU, and we're also a captive manager, and our captive book is run unbelievably well. And then, as Andrew alluded to earlier this morning, direct primary care, something we've been doing for a few years now as well. So those are 4 things, but that's what we're seeing work really, really well, at least for us.
Anybody else have a comment on that? Look at the quiet little panel. Anything, Pete? You're going to grab that microphone?
Tom, I have a comment. I would say that every group here is different, and whether it's different SIC code or they have different ailments. And for example, if you have a group and you have 10 diabetics on plan and they're making up 80% of your claims in a particular year, well, utilize Cypress and their vendor partners to actually attack what's driving up your utilization in those particular areas. So you've got great vendor partners to help do that and curtail claims. So it might be diabetics for one population, it might be RX for another population. It's all different.
Yep, got it. Anyone else comment before we keep moving on? All right, so I've got a question for both Adrian and Pete, because they represent, Adrian obviously at Swiss Re represents a direct right carrier. Pete at Pareto MGU represents the MGU, but it's kind of a relevant question, I think, so, because I'm sure that a big part of your job is evaluating TPAs, right? Just in trying to figure out who in the TPA space is doing a good job, who's not doing a good job, who's writing business that is going to be beneficial and profitable for you. So maybe you can share with people how you do that. How do you evaluate a TPA, and how is it that you decide who you're going to be working with in the short term and then in the long term?
We do evaluate our TPA clients, but it's kind of an ongoing process. So like anything, you have the initial conversations, get to know the client, get to know what their services are, provide the information about what kind of services you have, and then if it fits, you start working together. You get the first RFP in, underwriting summarily declines it, and then you start back from square one and develop the relationship. So we use the metals kind of as our guide. So we have silver, gold, platinum level producers. And most people, tend to think that it's based on premium. Okay, well, how much premium do I have to write to get to platinum? But it's really not about that. Obviously, to be platinum, we have to have enough business to truly have evaluated. And having a lot of premium, that gives you interactions and transactions. We get to see how we work together on claims, contracts. Are we issuing, a rush contract? We get it out, and then 3 months later, we're bugging you to get it back. Is premium paid on time? What are your cost containment programs? And we look at, as part of our program for our Premier Partners, we do quarterly reporting. So we have the opportunity on a quarterly basis to reach out to our clients and talk about the things that are important to us and the things that are important to them. And we feel it's important to go through that process 4 times a year and have those discussions, because there may be an area that we could work better together. Because as also part of the process of the evaluation and being a platinum partner, we also give benefits for that. So things like early lock, standard 90-day, we may go to 120, even 150. So we have to feel comfortable if we're giving that kind of a benefit that the information we have is good, and we can rely on it. It goes to waiving disclosure forms. Again, have to have confidence in the information that we're getting is complete. Additional things like waiving the binder premium, priority contracts, those types of things. So we feel like it's a benefit to us and is a benefit to our partners as well.
And Pete, how about you? Similar concept?
Did we work together in a prior life? Stole my answer. I would respond the same way Adrian responded. I would add two things, and I would say that first of all, for us, for all reinsurers, loss ratio is the biggest trigger for us. We have preferred partners based upon if we're making money from a stop loss perspective, first and foremost, more than anything. So it's premium, volume, and then loss ratio. And the second is that I would say is underwriter confidence. When our underwriters and when pretty much everybody sitting up here gets an RFP from Cypress, they know that the RFP is clean, it's concise, they know that the data that on the experience is accurate, and so they have a confidence, about them when they go to underwrite a group here in this room when it's coming from Cypress. We see a lot of junk, for lack of a better word, from an RFP process from other partners throughout the country, and so the underwriter, again, when they grab a hold of a Cypress RFP, they're more apt to be more aggressive on the premium, and they realize that if they write that group, they have a really good chance to renew it. So that's what constitutes a good TPA.
And so all right, go ahead, Adam, you have
Yeah, I
something to
just
add?
want to chime in. Your question was how do we evaluate TPAs? So I think if I'm understanding, maybe you're asking how are we evaluating some other TPAs out there other than Cypress?
Well, I have a follow-up question.
Well, so Barden's been in business 22 years, and word of mouth and reputation of TPAs is something we take very seriously. Our staff has got some significant experience with majority of the TPAs in the country. We base who we do business with on the relationship. We look at everything the same way. I'm sure everyone up here looks at loss ratio, profitability, the RFP package, but we want to work with people that we also enjoy working with them, that we know that when we're sitting down with them, they're giving us the honest answers. They're not just trying to get the lowest rate. So there are times when a TPA comes to us and says, hey, we want to work with you, and, well, I don't do it, I have Andrew do it, and we'll say no. So there are times we tell TPAs that we're not interested. Cypress has never been on that list.
All right, I appreciate that. So, all right, so expand a little bit on that, because so we're in a situation where there's two competing TPAs. How do you determine who gets the best rate? Do you determine who gets the best rate? Do you send out the same for everyone? If you do, how come? How do you deal with that in a competitive situation? And I'd be interested in everyone's take on that.
We will base, if we get a quote in from Cypress and a quote in from another TPA, we're going to try and do everything we can to give preferred pricing to our preferred partners, which would be Cypress. What we'll definitely do is if Cypress sends us 3 years of claims experience and the other TPA is only sending us partial claims experience, we're going to base their quote on what they submitted. They don't get the benefit of data that we got from another provider. So each quote that comes in is on their own. If another TPA is bidding on a Cypress account, we don't give that TPA a quote because they're a preferred partner and we protect our partners. So whenever somebody sends in a Cypress quote, unfortunately, we're going to decline it.
I would say we will, in fact, issue duplicate quote. We will issue a quote to two competing TPAs in the event we get it in from two TPAs, but we do try to manage our distribution network so that there is some exclusivity. We don't feel it serves our interest well to have too many TPAs with whom we work where we're bumping into ourselves on a regular basis in the quoting process. But I would tell you that, as Adam said, we will give credit for what is being asked to be quoted. So if you're bringing many of the programs that we are seeing here at Cypress University to a particular group, we will give credit for those programs if they're going to contain cost within our underwriting process. And I would just say there's few, if any, other TPAs that we work with that are going to have the same or as effective programs to be considered in the underwriting process.
All right, who hasn't talked? Chris, you have anything to add?
basically the same kind of thing that they've said.
Go up to the microphone.
I would just kind of confer with what they've said. Pretty much kind of covers it for the most part.
Okay, Kurt, you have anything to say?
We give our preferred TPAs some preferential pricing on options and add-ons to the stop-loss policy, the various riders and those kinds of things to recognize the value that a particular TPA brings to the table. It's a little tougher to do on an individual case-by-case basis, but we do very much what Steve just mentioned, and that is what's the suite of services you're installing, and then we're going to properly price for that. And Cypress, as an example, brings so many components to the table that when you recognize and price for all of those, the rate should come out a little more competitive than a competing TPA.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Tell me if I'm wrong on this, but it seems like, and we should ask all of the Cypress salespeople here, or we probably ask brokers too, but it seems like historically the determining factor on what you're going to get as a good rate and a not so great rate is very often predicated on what network you're using. Now we've spent the last day and a half abusing networks and talking about how ineffective they are, and we had an RBP panel talking about, BUCA payments at 350% of Medicare versus 140% of Medicare. So I guess my question is, am I right? And if I'm right, how come? Why do you do that? And I know you're not underwriters by trade, but so why is the network so important when it comes to determining the rates?
Well, even though the reference-based pricing is gaining a big foothold in the market, historically, since the 80s, the networks have kind of been the cornerstone of how underwriters and actuaries have kind of fixed their manuals. And so that's kind of, even though it's slowly changing, that's still kind of the basis of the manuals and how they're calculated.
I get it. But if I could editorialize for a second, see, now I'm going to start arguing with them. This is awesome.
I'm not saying it's right, but it's what's happening.
I get it. Because we spend so much of our time evaluating cost control programs that we can plug into be effective at reducing the cost of healthcare, but very often, if you work with a Cigna or a United Network or any one of the BUCA networks, they don't let you do that. So, how do you strike the balance there? What's really important in the underwriting process?
I think in addition to the network, what's going to get you the best pricing is the claims experience. We're going to hope to have 3 years or 2.5 years of claims experience, and if the group runs well and it's not running at a loss every year, we're going to look at what network you're using, but we're going to take into account, hey, look, this is the history of the group, these are the claims of the group, it runs well, they don't have significant medical conditions, and we're going to use that to guide our discretion on our numbers. When we do see quotes that come from the BUCAs, it's frustrating because there's players out there that think, 40% discount from Cigna. Well, yeah, but what are they allowing their providers to charge? It's costs that are beyond comprehension, and I don't want to get into it because it just makes me angry. But again, the claims experience, I think, is also a large driver of the competitiveness of the quote.
You got an answer to that?
So to help mitigate the difference in PPO discounts from, let's say, a BUCA to a Cypress, we think there's an intrinsic value in the medical management piece of Cypress. And so from an underwriting standpoint, there's an underwriting credit, discretionary credit that we apply to Cypress, and it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 to 9% on a particular case to help level the playing field between the discounts, quote-unquote discount from a BUCA to Cypress.
So do you guys think that at some point the underwriting manuals are going to change, that the networks will become less and less important?
I think our approach certainly is changing. I would say to what you described, Tom, I would just plead guilty as charged. I think that historically, the landscape with respect to PPO networks has been much different than what it is today. There have been a lot more networks, and up until the last 4 or 5 years, there hasn't been RBP as a viable alternative. And so, as that landscape is changing and networks are consolidating, and there are fewer and fewer networks, we are learning more about the ones that are left and how ineffective they are, and the fact that they don't have the plan participant or the employer's best interest at heart. They have the provider's best interest at heart. So I would say our approach to underwriting networks is changing. It is certainly different today than it was 3 years ago. and we're not giving the credit to the network that prohibits you from doing your job in other ways to manage cost.
Okay, so that's good news for people out there.
Yeah, and to Steve's point, and Chris's point earlier, I mean, the base rates on the manual are what they are. We didn't write them, and the old PPO model is a little antiquated these days. So what we're actually doing is getting a little creative, and for example, creating a discount equivalent for something like RBP that is far beyond what it was just 2 or 3 years ago, and that helps level the playing field too. So just kind of peeling back the curtain a little bit.
And as an example, as it relates to RBP, the most popular and most commonly used underwriting manual out there in the market among the stop-loss community just this year came out with their RBP pricing tool. So, I mean, it's been that long in the works. So there is a little bit of an antiquation to the process, but it is getting better and it is changing.
Can you share with us what that tool looks like and what kind of benefit?
It just came out, and we're evaluating it right now. We had our own RBP pricing tool that we've been using, and we're considering using this manual-based one, but it's still an evaluation. Literally just came out within the last 2 months.
2 months, and you had 2 months to read it. You don't know?
Talk to my underwriter.
We have a similar approach. We have, obviously the actuary, we have our own manual, so the actuaries set the manual. They also do all the network evaluations with our manual in mind. And they've done a similar thing with the reference-based pricing. Before we can quote a reference-based pricing quote to any producer, we have to evaluate their program upfront, get it to the actuaries, they price the model, and then underwriting can actually quote it to make sure that we are pricing it correctly. But from the standpoint of all the other vendors and cost containment, it is hard for a carrier with a lot, especially our size. We have a lot of producers that have a lot of great programs, but to evaluate every one of them individually is difficult. We try to do the best we can. But actuaries like data, so a lot of times it's a new program that just came out and it sounds great, but actuaries are reluctant to assign discounts to something where they don't have the data. So with somebody like Cypress, we look at your entire block and how it's running and how those programs are and be able to, again, we have to do it kind of through discretion. And give the underwriters some kind of guidelines so that when we are in that duplicate quote situation, we know what programs somebody like Cypress is using and some others, and we can give that a value and give that credit.
Yeah, Tom, you need to keep in mind all reference-based pricing vendors were not created equally also.
That's true.
There's a half dozen to a dozen out there now, and they're all different in how they approach things as far as how strong they are, as far as following up on when there's a claim that's balance billed and so forth.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Yeah, and just to expand a little bit further, I thought Adrian brought up something really interesting about the actuarial process and evaluating reference-based pricing vendors and various other cost containment models. Speaking from a sales standpoint, and I know we've got a lot of really sharp consultants in the room. I'm sure some of you are even working on your own proprietary programs. Maybe it's direct-to-employer contracting, that sort of thing. But the more lead time we have as a carrier, MGU, or captive manager, the better. A lot of times what happens is, hey, here's my program, where's the rates at? It's like, well, we probably need to have this conversation 3 or 4 weeks ago so that the actuary actually has time to dig in and do their work. So just a piece of advice to the audience, if you guys are working on anything unique, if you're working with any of us or any other carrier, captive manager, definitely 3 to 4 weeks lead time on these new programs is definitely a plus. So.
Okay, cool. Well, so we had a perspective of one stop-loss carrier during the RBP panel. So here's your opportunity to kind of address that issue. And I wonder if anyone in the audience might have a question about RBP. Oh, Corey, yes.
Thank you. I heard you say at lunch you're going to start having caps.
I'll qualify that. Is that working? I'll qualify that a little bit. We do have caps, but not the kind you're talking about. We do not cap the amount of the payment that will be made to the facility based on the percentage of Medicare. We do cap the amount of the fee that we will allow the vendor to charge, whether it's on a percentage of billed charges, on a percentage of savings, or whatever that might be.
Totally permissible.
I would would say it's, for us, the way we do it, we have a questionnaire, we evaluate the program. It is very important to us that you tell us what that program does, and if there is the capability to negotiate beyond. So in other words, we'll ask, okay, what are you using? 150%. What do you negotiate to? 200%. Add the asterisk and say, however, there are situations in which it is in the best interest of you and the plan participant and all of us to do something more, and put that in there. Then generally what we're going to do is say, okay, anything that's beyond that, we do need to be notified. We don't necessarily need to be involved, but we need to be aware. We need to know what's going on. Because what nobody wants is the surprise. You can't tell us it's going to be 150%, we're scorched earth, that's it, it's never going to be more, because we're going to rate it that way. And then when the claim comes in and it's negotiated at 250%, well, that might be a great deal, but we didn't know. And that's not fair to us. So we're just saying, put that out there, have those conversations up front so that we know and we're all on the same page. Don't try to do it at the time of claim.
Adrian hit the nail right on the head there. All of us up here, we reimburse claims. So we provide a product based on what you tell us to. I've known Ryan Day for 8 years, 9 years, and when I talk to him, he says, hey, this is what we're doing. We've got this range, and this is how it's going to work. We're going to start here, we're going to go up to here, we're going to make sure everything gets done and handled right. We know up front, so we can base our pricing on that. As long as we know ahead of time, it's not a problem. It's when there's a surprise, that's when, unfortunately, the contract is the contract, and we have to start looking at that. None of us want to decline a claim because of contract wording. We all want to know ahead of time, get us involved ahead of time so that we can help with the issue, not have to react to the issue.
All right. Have we beaten the RBP horse dead enough? Oh, no, you're going to beat it a little more?
I'm sorry?
Okay, go.
I was just going to say, to tag on to that, I mean, I'm sure this isn't the first time most of you have heard about RBP and RBP approaches, and there are a ton of different models in the marketplace. So to Adam's point, we just want to know what we're rating ahead of time. I can tell you we get requests to cap. We have, quote, requests coming in that say, quote, RBP, and all we're paying is Medicare plus 25%, and that's all we're paying. And that's the plan language. So we just want to know what we're quoting ahead of time. We can accommodate any model and rate any model. We may not choose to participate in every approach, but we can rate any model. If that makes sense.
All right, cool. But we should stop and see if there's anyone out there have a question at all, or should we keep going? All right, so let's turn our attention away from. Oh, there is a question. Let's see. Oh, way in the back.
So coming from the RBP perspective, I want to just let the audience know that not all stop-loss carriers are created equally when it comes to RBP. Just so we're very clear, these folks up here understand exactly how to underwrite this, to do it. So I know a lot of brokers, consultants will be like, well, I sent it over to here to the stop-loss carrier and they gave me 5% or 8%. It's probably someone who's not very well versed. These folks are very well versed up here on how to do this. So just FYI, if you send it to somebody and they have no idea, that's kind of the response you may get. But for these folks, that's something that you'll see a good response from.
Okay, great. Appreciate that, and that's absolutely true. All right, so let's change the subject a little bit. Adrian brought up something a couple of minutes ago, and Chris and I were talking about this not too long ago, and that has to do with the lock-in period and how long you have, as a stop-loss carrier, what kind of challenges do you have on locking in at 90 days or 120 days or something like that, as opposed to doing it 30 days in advance like it used to be?
Well, there's a few challenges with that, but just a kind of a side note, you had a number up here earlier today how the average cost of healthcare was over $18,000 a year this year. When I got in the business, and I hate to date myself, but in 1984, the average cost of healthcare in the country was between $4,200 and $5,000 a year. So part of the challenge today is the total cost involved in healthcare. And every employer is like pulling their hair out every year when they're coming to a renewal. So even though all of us carriers offer lock-ins in 90 days, if it's a case that's had a really good year, and we offer a good number at 90 days out, they're looking at themselves and they're saying, well, normally when I offer a good renewal, it's usually with some kind of a small increase. And one of my esteemed colleagues up here is saying, well, what a great case. I might offer a little better offer. And so what happens is there's a negotiation goes on, and that 90 days usually turns into a 45-day lock. And so what happens is, even though that 90-day lock is offered, by the time the negotiations are done, it's somewhere between 45 and 30 days. So we do offer those things, but very rarely, and I think my colleagues might agree with that, that even though you offer that, it ends up being less than 90 days. The converse to that is that you have a case that has got claims going on. And so what you're hoping from the carrier and from the client's perspective and the broker is saying maybe something will change in that large claim to help us with either a laser position or something changes that helps us get that case into a better position. And then that drags out for a few weeks until a decision has to be made. And then you're also looking at 45 to 30 days. So even though those offers are out there, I see very seldom that we actually get a 90-day lock. And my colleagues
Yeah,
maybe...
Pete, you're nodding your head. Do you agree with that? But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, 1984, really?
What's that?
Nothing.
Really?
It's really shocking to me as a carrier when we offer a 90-day disclosure, per your comment, that more employers don't jump on that and sign that document right to the day, especially on a clean disclosure where you've got a responsible, renewal from your carrier. So you've agreed upon the renewal and you've got a clean disclosure. The very first thing I'm doing is signing that document because you just never know. All of us have seen here in a 1-week period something pop up where now this is your liability instead of ours. So if we offer 90-day locks 10 times, maybe 1 or 2 times they'll actually sign it at 90 days.
Yep, that's our experience as well. So take advantage of it.
Yeah, I cannot tell you how many times in the last 18 months that we've offered that, and then this waiting game goes on, and just Murphy's Law, a claim comes up, and now we've got a whole different situation. So I would agree with Peter, and I think most of my colleagues up here agree that if you get that opportunity, take it.
Yep, I agree. And we're lucky here because we've got stop-loss carriers that represent sort of different segments of the business and different size of employers, and not that anyone, I don't think there's anyone at the table that wants to be known as a specific type of stop-loss. But for example, Steve and Kurt many of our smaller to mid-sized groups, they've been successful at writing that with us. So I suppose the question is, most of those small groups are, in our experience over the last several years, is they've come from fully insured. What kind of challenges do you have as an underwriter taking over a fully insured case? What are the problems? What do you need, and how do you solve them?
Well, first of all, the small group market to us is attractive because we're looking at groups that are currently fully insured, and it's a way for us to grow, and it's a way for you to grow, and everybody wins. That being said, taking over a case from a fully insured carrier is not the easiest thing to do because of the lack of data. You'd be surprised that occasionally when as a broker, if you really push for it, sometimes you can get more than you think. But that being said, we have to find a way to deal with limited data or no data, and it's usually no data. So we take 2 approaches. If you can't get data and you're unwilling or unable to get some kind of a short form medical questionnaire completed, then we can quote those cases all day long, but you're going to get manual rates or effectively manual rates, and you're going to find them to be rather uncompetitive. Our solution to that is, and I hesitate to call them medical questionnaires, we call them plan participant disclosure statements, but it's a short form, it's a 1-page, and it's kind of a quick hit, and it's going to tell us after a nurse review of those forms what potential problems might be out there. We don't use it as a debit credit style underwriting. We're not saying, oh, look, here's a +1 to the rates and a -2 to the rates. We're using it as, honestly, a yes, a no, or a laser. So we're going to quote the case. We're going to quote it as competitively as we can. And if those questionnaires come in and they're clean, then the rates stand. If the questionnaires come in and we see some major problem and it's a risk that we don't want to take, then we're going to rescind or decline. depending on at what point we get the questionnaires. And most often, if there is some issue that comes up, we'll try to address that with hopefully as small a laser as possible.
Yeah, I would agree that the lack of information is the biggest obstacle to groups transitioning from fully insured. And I would just say we're willing to be flexible. I think the more you can share as a broker or an employer with our underwriter to make them feel comfortable that there's been some kind of an assessment of the group and the group population, the more apt we're going to be to give a competitive quote and come off of that manual. So, you know, if you've got a group that's largely single population and it's all concentrated in one location, you know, having a preliminary disclosure statement come in with the RFP that shows us that the broker's had a conversation with someone at the group in the know. One of the reasons why we like the small group market is because the person making the decision to be self-funded in the first place is more familiar with his population. You're just not likely to have somebody out sick with a catastrophic claim that you're not aware of. So that's a reason to write small group self-funded business. So if you can show us that you've had that conversation with the employer and somebody's put some thought into it and then maybe even done a little research, multiple locations, maybe getting a disclosure signed by location, and we can be a little bit more competitive out of the gate and give a reason to be self-funded.
Great, thanks. Okay, so I'm gonna risk getting half the room angry with me, but I want to talk about brokers and consultants working directly with stop-loss carriers. And I only bring it up because, and I think I may have shared this story last year, because a year ago, last January, we had a case that was a longtime client of ours that ended up moving away from us. And the broker who brought this killer stop-loss rate never really kind of disclosed to the client that along with the killer stop-loss rate, there was also a $25,000 specific run-in limit, meaning only $25,000 of claims from the previous year were going to be eligible to be counted towards the reimbursement. And lo and behold, on December 23rd or December 21st or something like that, they had like a $250,000 claim crop up, of which $25,000 was eligible for reimbursement after the fact. So I guess my question is, and I'll ask you to risk getting half the room upset too, are you cool with having brokers come to you and get stop-loss quotes directly or contract with them directly? And do you see any difficulties with that? I suppose there's going to be different answers to that. And then what are your expectations as the carrier relative to the job the broker needs to do going forward with it?
So yeah, we actively quote with consultants. Certainly not gonna hide that. My biggest piece of advice is make sure your carrier MGU has a cordial or existing relationship with the third-party administrator. And I don't mean to answer your anecdote with an anecdote, but the FIA Group has a podcast that they launch about once a month, and I think it was the end of last year. The topic of discussion was the fact that there's been an increased number of stop-loss claim denials because of the fact that more business is placed by a consultant or broker with a TPA that they've never worked with before, or they don't understand each other's processes and procedures. Perhaps there's larger gaps in the plan document versus the policy that they're writing on. So just be cognizant of who you're trying to match up together. I mean, I think it goes without saying we're all in the same room here, so you're pretty safe to work with any of us directly. But that's something to be very, very cautious of is, you know, do you have an existing relationship with this TPA? How well do you know them? You know, what's your track record?
So I've never had a problem making half of a room angry at me before, so I'll take a stab at this. I usually stand up at SPBA, which is a conference for TPAs, and I ask the pointed questions, and everyone looks at me, and my sales guy starts to frown because he's like, oh, we just lost another sale. Barden, probably 98% of our business is directly through a TPA. Not because we don't like brokers, consultants, excluding the people in this room. You guys are all smart enough to be here because you're trying to make yourself more educated. You're trying to understand more about what's going on in the market, and especially self-funding. We have found that there are a lot of players out there who don't understand self-funding. They want quick money, they want easy money. So they'll bring us groups, and we're going to vet a broker consultant the same way we vet a TPA. We want to make sure that they understand what we're doing and that we understand what they're doing. So there are times where we tell a broker, hey, we're good. We're gonna work direct with Cypress on this one. If you want our numbers, that's great, but we want Cypress to be involved in it.
We will also work with brokers, but they have to use one of our approved TPAs. We won't let them just tell us what a random TPA to put it with. So it has to be one of our approved TPAs.
Any broker out there want to have the guts to tell us about your experience relative to going out there and getting stop loss quotes and being in charge of stop loss and what your expectation is of the TPA going forward once you do it? Is there anyone here who does it? See, this is the smartest room. Oh, there's one right there. Do you want to share with us your experience? That'd be great.
Yeah, I would, as a broker, I completely agree that you have to have a good relationship both with your carrier and your TPA. I'll tell you that we have struggled to find great TPAs. There are this many, and you guys are one of them that we're here, right? There are just not that many left anymore. And when they are out there, we're finding that they're falling into the carrier traps and becoming more carrier-like. And I don't have anything against carriers. We work with carriers. They have their place. Not every employer wants to do that next thing. They just want to skim along. Okay, we can do that too. A couple things you guys mentioned, just as a point. When you talk about locking in early, we would love, I wrote down, Adrian, your comment about up to 150 days. That would make us the happiest people in the world to be able to lock that stuff in early. That's something we want to do. We want to protect our employer clients. So what you guys are talking about, we're right there with you and love being here and hearing these kinds of great exchanges where no one's afraid to say the truth, right? I'm not afraid to say that there are brokers that fall down, there are TPAs that I won't work with, and there are carriers that we're not so sure about either. So I'm really enjoying this exchange that we're all having.
Awesome, thanks. While the microphone's out there, anyone? Look at the stage left coming through for us now. Thanks. Nobody? All right. I'll keep going. We got about 5 minutes, but here's the other thing. So we talked this morning about reference-based pricing being the #1 topic on everybody's lips. I will tell you that all of our sales and service people will tell you probably the #2 thing that we're talking about in the industry or that we're asked about is level-funded plans. Level-funded, partially self-funded, self-funded. Johnny, what's the difference between them? And you write a lot of that.
All right, so level funding is stop loss. If you have it through Cigna, if you have it through United, if you have it through Aetna, there's an underlying stop loss policy. It's not some bizarre gray area that somehow exists between fully insured and self-funding. There's an administrative services agreement, there's a stop loss policy, there's a network contract. It's just all bundled together. Level funding, really all it is the mechanism by which you as the employer are choosing to fund your claims. And it's pre-funding them, and the arrangement with your carrier is such that there is instant monthly accommodation. So you're not going to be waiting around for a reimbursement for a couple of weeks if you happen to exhaust what's available to you year to date. But at the end of the day, it is normal stop loss. It's just a mechanism with how you're funding.
All right. Anybody have a different opinion of that?
Okay, Johnny and I are stepping into the cage.
Yes.
Kidding. He's young. He'd kill me. I agree with pretty much everything he said, except that it is more than just a funding mechanism depending on the product. If you've seen one level-funded product, you've seen one level-funded product. They can all be vastly different. I would argue that Steve and I have been doing level funding since we got in the stop-loss business, and I've been in it for 30 years, so rounding. But with a small group and a spec and an ag and a specific advance and an aggregate accommodation, you can make anything level funding, okay? But it's oftentimes more than that. My product is more than that. We have a product we call integrated stop loss. There is no specific deductible to it. So it's a vastly different product. I hesitate to call it ag only because it's different than that, but there is no specific deductible. So there are vast differences between how these products are designed. And some of the questions you probably want to ask as you're looking at different level funding options is, who's touching the money is a key there. And this relates to the Cignas and the Aetnas of the world that sell it, and it relates to some of us on the panel and how we sell it, or some of our other friendly competitors out there. Carriers get the fixed costs, right? That covers the risk that may or may not occur. But the claims fund, is the carrier or the MGU ever touching your claim fund? And if there's money left at the end, is it yours or is it split with them somehow? These are all questions you need to ask. And again, I've seen 20 different permutations of this. So it's a little too easy and too big of a catch-all phrase to just say level funding, because there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, this is a great chance for me to be contrarian up here and possibly anger more people. There was level fund 1.0, which came out, high spec premiums, low attachment points, because if there was less of a claims fund at the end, then it didn't go back to the client. We all saw how that went. And then there was level funded 2.0, which seems to be more of a traditional pricing for stop loss, more realistic. If you want your clients to feel like they have a fully insured or level funded type product, just have a max fund. Have a max fund every month. Barden will offer weekly ag accommodation if that's something that the client needs. We don't need to have a separate name for level funding or whatnot. We want to make the client comfortable. We want to make the client happy. We try to kind of stay, I apologize, I know some of my friendly competitors up here are probably going to want to kill me later, but we try and stay away from some of the new wave things that come along. We stick with traditional stop loss because that's what we're experts at.
And I'll just touch on that too. I don't know if anybody else will agree with this, but level funding is still very, very popular. I personally haven't written quite as much of it in the last 12 or 18 months, just for the simple reason that the market's evolved. And a lot of employers don't necessarily need that additional helping hand because, post ACA, I think we've all seen the figures with how much this business has changed. So there may be, I don't want to say there's eventually going to be less of a need for it, but for at least some of the clients that we haven't needed it quite as much. Just the employers haven't needed that extra hand-holding.
Okay, cool. All right, well, so we're basically out of time. Just one last question, lightning round. Just give me your thoughts. There's been a lot of consolidation in this industry over the last couple of years, and then weirdly, there's been a lot of new entrants into it as well. Good, bad, indifferent, what's the future? You want to just go right to Adam, just start, what do you think?
It's been crazy. The acquisitions have been fast and furious through the market, and the new players, I don't know where they're getting the capital to go out as aggressive as they're going to buy the business. I would say from what I've seen from the P&C side in the last 8 months, 10 months, the market, in my opinion, the market's going to start to firm up over the next 8 to 14 months, and some of those new players that have been getting overly aggressive on their pricing, they're going to have trouble on their renewals. So I would say the carriers you see up here, there's a reason to stick with them year over year because it's going to help smooth things out when the market firms. It's not an if, it's a when. So stick with your incumbent carriers. It's worth paying a couple extra points on renewal because the relationship's going to pay off when things start to get a little shaky.
Chris, what do you think?
Yeah. Real quick, I would agree with Adam. I think the market is going to firm up. I think Andrew had a slide earlier that showed that the claims are creeping and they're going to continue to creep. There's no frequency versus severity is as great as it's ever been, and what that means for anybody that doesn't understand that, the frequency of large claims is as great as it's ever been. With the unlimited medical, it's just there's no end in sight.
I would even take it further. I would say the market is firmed up. You have two of the top 5 largest stop loss carriers gave 19% average, 17 to 19% increases on their block of business last year. I mean, 17 to 19% increases on the equivalent of $2 billion worth of business. That's pretty substantial, and it's going to continue because of the large claims, because of the specialty RX and all the other things we talk about that driving up claims.
Yeah. Steve?
I would say it's overall good because it's a reflection of the opportunity in the marketplace and the demand for employers who want to self-fund. We have more capacity in the marketplace, in the stop-loss marketplace now. Unfortunately, I think some of that is coming from the BUCA carriers who are themselves putting a greater emphasis on their business moving from fully insured to self-funded, and that ought to tell you something right now. I don't think their solution, their network, and whatever other minimal solutions they have are any more effective if you're self-funded than if you're fully insured. If anything, it's going to be less effective. So I would just say that the independent TPA, unbundled stop loss, and other cost management components are even more effective and more important today than they were recently.
All right, Adrian.
We're seeing a lot of it, in the broker market as well, where the smaller agencies are selling, to, the larger agencies. Probably a lot to do with, technology and the costs associated with it. But, there's also the organizations that you're seeing pop up. There was always the UBA, then there's the band, now there's True, and there's others where smaller agencies that want to stay independent can pool their resources, find the best vendors, share ideas. So we're seeing that, good and bad.
Okay, Kurt?
The consolidation leads to the expansion, because when a company gets acquired, there's oftentimes a few disgruntled people that decide they're going to go off and do that on their own. That's not always a bad thing. Sometimes they bring relationships and they bring a lot of skill and talent to the table, but other times, perhaps just because they can underwrite doesn't mean they can run a business, doesn't mean they know how to build a claim shop and all those things. So there's ups and downs with it. I would say there's probably way too much underwriting going on with it now without enough adult supervision. But
last but not least, I guess, our outlook is largely positive. It's a really fun time to be in this industry. We always have our eyes 3 to 5 years down the road, and it's really, really exciting time. A lot of things that we're here talking about today, wonderful time to be in the business. And the initial question about, new entrants, we're seeing a lot of that. I think we all are. But, we're all long-term players in this business up here. I think we've all seen some of our competitors that pop up, and the rumor mill gets going at our industry conferences, and they wrote $80 or $100 million of stop loss premium last year, and they go away. They want to try to balloon up as big as possible in themselves. So they're not long-term players, and ultimately, the employer at the end of the day is left holding the bag, especially if they came in with this rate that was 30% below what the 6 or 7 of us up here were offering. There's going to be a correction, and no bueno. So,
Indeed. All right. Well, so we're over time, but this is great. Obviously, all of these people have tables over in the social ballroom, so go and visit them and talk further. And we appreciate everything that you've done. So thanks, man.